So we've looked at the situation, and I'd like to move from that. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay, great. So let's look at some current trends, and I would also say the inevitable snapback. So as I've painted kind of a gloomy picture, which you already know already, and we hear quite a bit about the state of America and Christianity in the modern West all the time. I know that I didn't probably teach you anything that you didn't know in toto, maybe giving some details and contours to it. But I want to move from that to what is a rather hopeful sign. So a lot of these younger generations, I believe, do have an end of the road or a cornered mentality, not just in terms of looking at the national life or religious life or their own personal economic or familial situations, but this also creates a mentality of resistance and reaction in many good ways. So just to throw out an example, you might have been surprised and shocked, and I'm speaking to the older generations, by the Olympic opening. Anybody remember that? Yes. Yeah. Very blasphemous. I refuse to put that image on the screen and assault your senses with it. I mean, it's disgusting. How many of you were shocked by that? Yeah, no young people raised their hand. Maybe because they were in houses that didn't show them those things. But I wasn't shocked, you know. Again, to describe the reaction of my parents versus me, they were just shocked and horrified, as a good Christian ought to be. Well, I consider myself a good Christian too, but I wasn't, I was appalled, but I wasn't shocked, you know. I wasn't. What do you expect? It's the modern Olympics. And that's the difference of reaction. And the folks that have grown up in younger generations, the satanic mask has already come off, and it's coming off more and more. And I do think it has produced a moment of reaction. You know, an animal may run as long as it can, but if you actually corner it, what is it apt to do? Turn and fight, you know? And that is part of the reaction that's going on. People are awake. Not just the younger generations, but lots of people. Lots of people have moved into a much more active posture as that mask comes off further and further, and are ready to do something. And again, I would say especially young people. Now, this may seem like a strange segue, but I want to talk about the French Revolution, because you have a similar phenomenon at work there. So the French Revolution. The French Revolution furthered and intensified the religious divisions among the French people. There were already divisions before the Revolution. In terms of the common people, there were some areas that, because of Enlightenment, anti-Christian ideas, had drifted from the faith. Some of that had filtered down to some regions. Some regions were very anti-clerical, opposed to the church, not necessarily Christianity, but to specifically the Roman Catholic hierarchy and clergy. But when the revolution happened, and this gets back to what Pastor John Preuss was talking about, the intertwining, or I was responding, saying there is a kind of intrinsic intertwining between politics and religion at certain junctures in history, and I would say all the time on some level. But after the revolution kicked off, and if you don't think that the French Revolution was a horrible anti-Christian event, we got to talk about other things, but not now. But yeah, the French Revolution was just a disaster, and was rooted in anti-Christian philosophical and cultural beliefs. In terms of the common man, so here's the reaction of what happened after the revolution, especially after the Reign of Terror, and the mask came off there. Because you know, some of the alleged more moderates were more in control early on. But then you have the Reign of Terror, where the mask slips, and they are not just going after abuses of the church, they're not just trying to reform things, but it's very explicitly a de-Christianization program. Once that sets in, the reaction turns up. So with the common man, the people in regions which were already committed to the church, on average, more committed, grew more committed to both the church and resisting the revolution. So all those charts about America being torn asunder, as wave after wave of cultural revolutions come in and political opinions and religious opinions are intertwined, this is what happened in France too. So there were some people at the beginning of the revolution that said, we want political revolution, and yet we still view ourselves as loyal sons of the church, at least to some degree. But very quickly that shifted to, on average, you are irreligious or might see the church as good in some ways, but denying many fundamental doctrines, and you're yoked to the revolution, or you're part of the reaction and your Christianity intensifies. And that happened as it became clear that revolution's true aims included overthrowing Christianity itself. Those people in regions which were less committed to the faith, usually coupled with large support of the revolution, grew more and more irreligious. Now here's another interesting thing, and it's about the aristocracy. So in the later years of the ancient regime, which is France before the revolution, religion had been out of fashion for the aristocracy. The Enlightenment ideals and anti-Christian philosophies hadn't filtered down to a huge extent. In some regions, maybe, but it was more of an anti-clerical reaction. But in the upper crust of society, religion was already out of fashion before the revolution. But then, in the later 1790s, after the revolution, after the Reign of Terror, there were the first signs of a return to the church of the aristocracy. Under the Restoration, the aristocracy generally became strong supporters of the Catholic Church and clerical power. Many individuals underwent some kind of personal conversion. I mean, you can read stories about this, where people who, before the Revolution and the Reign of Terror, were, they were scoffers. Well, okay, maybe religion's for the common man, but I'm an enlightened individual. I deny some basic doctrines, and, this is just all very passé. But in the face of that satanic mask slipping, in the wake of all that destruction and slaughter, and the overthrowing of everything that had been normal in France, or at least the attempt, yes, some people, it wasn't a true conversion. But other people, it was sincere. In the reality that they were in, yes, it might have been started because of political considerations or moral degradation, but it led them to a truly renewed faith that included actually subscribing to the basic doctrines of the Christian faith. Again, I know we're talking about the Catholic Church. I don't want to get into Lutheran Catholic stuff, but just hang with me on the analogy. So yeah, some underwent some kind of personal conversion, but regardless of individual conviction, the aristocracy as a class became committed to the church as a social and political institution. That's from a wonderful book that, if you want to read more about not the revolution, but rather about how the revolution and how that all of those ideas and political philosophies spread and actually were manifested in Western European countries, check this out. Religion and the People of Western Europe. Make sure you buy the new edition. It really is an indispensable, comprehensive book, and it's very, very thin. As revolutionary forces spread through Europe, cohesion in society fell apart. There were irreconcilable warring factions within nations. Sound familiar? Yeah, we're in the same situation. So I like memes. Here's a meme that I made. So you've got the car, and it obviously was traveling along down towards further degeneracy. And I've named them the young bros, right? And they are sharply veering off to Christendom, and I use that very particularly, and maybe even the church. What you said before, John, where we have to make sure that it is not Christianity subsumed under whatever political or cultural philosophy that they're truly tied to. My point in reacting was, it is intertwined, and it even should be intertwined to a certain extent. Many elites are becoming much more friendly to the idea of Christendom, whether or not they actually believe in the doctrines. Many of them are. And with any successful counter-revolution, you have to have elites. You have to. You just have to. You know, I'm not against populism at all, but this populist idea that you're just going to have a groundswell and change everything, it's not actually something that's feasible. You have to have elites on your side. And I'm saying we don't have to go out and find them. It's happening naturally because of the snapback. What we need to do is use the momentum and also get them not just to accept Christendom as an ideal, as intrinsic to Western European civilization or something like that, but also to say, okay, yeah, these political ideologies or philosophies are more in line with Christianity, or at least they're not satanic. But what we need to do is also say where the real treasure is actually in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they are open to it, at least some. So this snapback is, as I said before, an intertwined cultural, political, and theological move. This makes sense since that which is being reacted to, radical liberalism, wokeness, humanism, whatever you want to call it, it's not just a political philosophy. And that's why the reaction is not going to just be a political reaction or just a theological one, because humanism, fundamentally, is a utopian religion which seeks to throw off God and His Word and create heaven here on earth. It has theological doctrines, goals, and beliefs. Let's listen to Walther on this. So Walther on humanism and also mentioning the French Revolution. We define humanism as the belief in a human ideal, a belief that man within himself has the ability to develop into a state of completeness and achieve happiness. Therefore, in order to reach this ideal state, nothing else is needed than to grant each person as much room as possible to develop freely and without restraint. Noticeably, the basic working definition of a lot of people in America, of freedom. However, humanism, which wants to be independent of God and men, wants that man renounce happiness and the life to come as something which is dubious. It wants that man finds this happiness within himself, which will surely change the earth into heaven and promises equal happiness to all, this egalitarian streak. This humanism is the Chiliism, which is an old term. It means millennialism or utopianism. This Chiliism of the secular world, it is its religion. It always appears with force whenever Christianity wavers. When at the end of the 17th century, now he gets into the history, and the beginning of the 17th century, deism raised its head in England, moved on to France, and finally was exported to Germany, there were many heralds of humanism. Rousseau stands out as a prominent proponent of humanism. It was he who first expressed the idea that man by nature is pure and good, and that in order to achieve happiness, he needs to leave all that is unnatural and return to nature, to himself, to become human again. He spoke in a truly magical manner, which like a sweet poison saturated the hearts of millions. This idea developed into the ever more common theories of undeniable inherent human rights, of inherent freedom and equality, that only the democratic Republican Constitution, as well as the socialist and communist theories of the quote-unquote New Times, were acceptable. These theories came to fruition in the world-shaking catastrophe of the First French Revolution, whose well-known slogan was freedom, equality, and brotherhood. They incorporated these tenets in their Constitution of 1791 as the basis of their model state and proclaimed that human rights was the most important principle of all state laws. It is known what pinnacle of human and national happiness this grand humanistic experiment did achieve. It was a happiness in which all of hell's murderous spirits triumphed over the world with their demonic laughter against humanity itself, which caused terror even among humanists abroad. How many prominent figures who 10, 20, maybe even 3 or 4 years ago were pretty much on board with the liberalism or humanism of, the 1990s? They're not in the same place anymore, at least not some of them. They know that there's poison in the apple. I'm not saying they're Christians. I'm not saying they're ready to flood into our churches, but the reaction is happening, and not just with the elites, not just with your general population, but especially with young people. And talking about how religion and some intertwining with politics is true, Ryan Burge, who I've used several of his charts already, he noted this. I would change his language a little bit because liberal is a very slippery word. It depends on what you mean. I would say humanism is a religion which inevitably displaces Christianity. And he notes this in the data. Being politically liberal and being highly religious are just not compatible. He's not making a theological statement. He's making, you might further it if you want, but he's making a factual statement based on observation. Among white people who never attend church, 45% are liberal. Among weekly or more weekly attenders, only 11% are liberal. And this pattern is there for every single racial group. Why? Because if you take on humanistic, political, what you think are just philosophies or political opinions, you actually are incorporating into your belief system religious principles and ideology, or not ideology, but a belief system. And that is eventually going to displace the faith. And we see this borne out. But let's go back to the snapback, because I want to show you some of the snapback. And here's where we get to see some good data. So views on gender binary. Percent who say there are only two genders. So the green dots are in 2021, and the blue dots are in 2023. All Americans have shifted 6 points. This is not a huge shift, but in 2 years' time, this shows that there's been overreach and a natural reaction against that. Very similar to the reign of terror after the revolution. So again, a lot of it is what you would typically see. And so there's this broad shift across all generations. As you would expect, in older generations, there's not much of a shift, because the older you are, the more confirmed and kind of, stuck in your ways you are, right? You know? So there's not going to be a shift, good or bad, as much. But if you notice, it goes bigger and bigger in terms of the shift, even if not by the actual base number, as you go down the generations. So look at the shift in the silent generation. It's 1 point. Or the baby boomers, it's 6 points. But you look to the millennials, it's 9 points, and even more. Gen Z, it's actually, 14 points? In a 2-year time, that's a huge shift. That means the reaction is already actually happening. Here's another little metric. Homosexual couples should have the right to marry one another. For decades, this has been going up across all populations, liberal, independent, conservative, white, black, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's been going up and up and up and up and up. And for the first time, there's actually a notable downturn. And if you see in the red, it's young people, broadly speaking, versus in the blue. It's going down with both, except older Catholics. But even with mainliners, it has gone down. But it's more stark in the red. Not much more stark, but again, it's not just the older generations reacting against stuff that's new and crazy, but it's all across the board. So the snapback is both all across the board, but it's also, as we'll continue to see, more intense in younger generations. Again, politics and religion are intertwined, and the next one's a political one. Young men are leaving the Democratic Party. This is an astounding graph. 2016, young men across all races, ethnicities, whatever, 51% in 2016 were identified or lean towards the Democratic Party. 2023, 39. And because we have the data on the last election, we know it's even more. So again, this is intensified in younger generations and particularly men. Back to religion. Religious attendance by gender and birth year. Here's where we also see that the snapback, the men are leading. So it's long been kind of a cliche that who goes to church more? Women. That is very true over many generations in America and in Western European civilization. and men have been lower in their attendance. However, that has actually shifted by birth year in newer generations. You can see the switch in both of these graphs. It's not a huge disparity, and of course, when you've only got small disparities, it depends on sample size, but as you'll see, it kind of piles up, and the gap is widening. That shows that it's real. Also, people who actually attend are getting more and more conservative, not just politically, but also theologically. So back in the 1980s, this is white weekly attending Christians. So I couldn't narrow it down any further with this data. But so how you view the Bible. So it's a book of fables, is very, very low, as you would expect by weekly attenders. But back in the 80s, more people believed that it was inspired and not literal than literally true. But you see the shift? That's a huge shift. That's a huge shift. And again, my point about a snapback is it's not just a shift, but it's a continuing widening. So right now in I guess this was 2022, if you are a white, weekly attending Christian, chances are, 60%, you believe that the Bible is literally true. And that's why sometimes it's good to break down this data. Instead of just all Americans, it's focusing in. The people coming to church, the people who actually are attending, they are getting more conservative, both on the political and on the theological fronts. So political ideology of white weekly attending Christians. So if you're a moderate, you have been going, less and less of you have been going to church since the 1970s. Liberal, same thing. It's a slow decline, but it is notable. But who has actually been showing up? And that's because conservative politics are not identical to the faith, but they are more in line with it at this time in this place. And that's who is not only coming, but also, as I'm pointing out, more apt or open to coming. This is an interesting one too. This is all the way back in 2014, so it's a little bit out of date, but I really wanted to point it out, because it's from Pew and they many times do some really good work. What's really notable is Catholics are bleeding. I mean, it's just a fact that the only reason why the Catholics are somewhat maintaining their numbers is by immigration. That's the only reason. They're bleeding uncontrollably. For every one person that joins, 6.5 leave. That's in 2014. And unaffiliated, as we've seen the rise of the nuns, is huge. I mean, those are the big, huge stories, obvious. For every one person becoming affiliated, you got 4.2 that are joining the ranks of the unaffiliated, the nuns. Historically, black Protestants and mainline Protestants are bleeding. Everybody knows that, right? But here's the interesting thing that I think is the most significant. Even though Christianity in general is declining, for everyone that leaves evangelical Protestantism, so conservative Protestants, it's actually there's 1.2 joining. Now that won't offset the birth-death rate, okay? If you follow me with the math. That's not going to offset the gradual decline, but it's focusing in on who is actually coming and who's actually interested in the faith, whether it be rejoining or people who haven't come or our own sons and daughters who have friends that see the world for what it is and they want something more. Okay, I already alluded to the fact that there's big divergence between men and women on this. I want to make that very visually clear. So the battle of the sexes is on. I mean, and it's on like never before in recent American history, on politics and religion. So here's Gen Z's gender gap in terms of a survey done, support for Harris versus Trump. So you see there's this widespread bifurcation between male and female. It's no secret that women tend to vote more liberal and men tend to vote more conservative. But look at that gap with Gen Z. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. So Also, I would point out, who's the most conservative generation there? Yeah, Gen X. I mean, yeah, there we go. Yeah, Jeff likes that. So anyway, but that's the thing. If all of those spreads are relatively similar, all the way down, including most of the millennials, with Gen Z, this gap is widening and widening. If you want to see the gap really widen, I know that this is a small thing. This is as much as I could blow it up without looking ridiculous. This goes back all the way to 1895, about your birth year and your political ideology broken out just with the white population. And as you can see, men in the black line over the last several decades tend to be more conservative. But what do you see at the very end? It's like an alligator mouth. Yeah, those are birth years. You see the bifurcation start in the 80s, or the late 80s and the 90s, and then it widens out to a huge gap for those born 2000 and especially 2005. The battle of the sexes is real. I see opportunity in it, but it also hurts the marriage market, which we're going to talk about later. Here's another thing. This isn't just the United States. It's all over the Western world, and I know South Korea is on there too, but they've been under our cultural and political influence for a long time. So it's still worth looking at. Look at that ideology gap between men and women. Again, women tending to be more liberal, but look at the gap since 2015. It just opens up, whether it be in South Korea, the US, and Germany, UK. It's all over the place. Even if the populations are at a different place, I mean, the battle of the sexes is on, and more than I think anybody really realizes. Here's another thing in terms of trends. So back to the religion. Nearly 4 in 10 Gen Z women are unaffiliated. So a percentage of women who are religiously unaffiliated. Yes, it goes up in every generation, except one notable difference. Gen Z, it's more affiliation. But with women, it's the opposite. It continues that liberal trend. The snapback is in the population in general, in some of the young people as well, but most particularly if you break it down with young men. Here's another way to express this. Share of nuns by gender. Again, back to the old cliche, more women and children go to church than men. And that's been a struggle our entire lives. Yet at the same time, back during the Great Awakening in the mid-2000 teens, guess what happened? Women, by and large, especially young women, swallowed the Great Awakening. They swallowed that ideology and they shot up as nuns, walking away from the church. So I want to go to this next. This is, I didn't make this one, and I don't know if you can read it, but what I've been expressing I think was perfectly encapsulated by this meme. So here you have 2025, especially talking about the recent presidential election, and you've got the guys going to the right and the girls going to the left. And then they're talking. Not to each other, well, sort of. So the girls, this is lonely in 2027. And then in 2028, the girls, they've gotten so strong and mature, kind of hot. And the guys saying, I would literally kill for you to have babies and make pies. So they're looking, and yeah, looks like a good deal. And then in 2030s, they zoom over. Again, it's not going to happen exactly like that. I know. But I do think it speaks to a truth. Where men lead, whether it is good or whether it is bad or whether it's somewhere in between, women are going to follow. I mean, we would say they should if it's good and they shouldn't if it's bad. Again, I'm not so much making a theological point at the moment as a factual one. Where guys go, women tend to follow. You can bring up lots of exceptions if you want, fine. I'm talking about a general trend and a truth. Men are created by God to be what? Leaders of their households. And this is true not just by Scripture's declaration, but we observe it in reality. This is how it goes. And so that's what I hope for that is going to happen. With men peeling to the right, this will bring the girls over to the right as well. But again, it's not going to happen without a lot of help. And of course, what right are they moving to? Does it include the church or not? Is it just politics or not? We've got to be aware of these things. Okay, so we've talked about the situation, and I've thrown a lot of data at you. And I know it's probably old to see all these charts. Who wants to see more charts? Anybody? Oh, we can just do this. Forget about the banquet. Let's keep going. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, got a lot of data junkies. Great. So, no, there's not many more charts, but I do want to kind of conclude talking about the situation. And you might know this individual. Anybody know him? So, just this last June at the Christian Culture Conference at the college, President Hill was welcoming everybody, and I made sure to go back and quote you accurately. So he did say this. I went back and paused and typed and all that kind of stuff. But this is what he said. Our time, our age of the world is a time of unparalleled opportunity, hope, and joy. I think he's absolutely right. I think he's absolutely right. And I think that even though most of all of that data was a lot of gloom and doom, I think that there's lots of signs for hope and joy always in the gospel, but also a lot of opportunity concerning the particular circumstances. And number two, that even if that wasn't true, we're Christians, we have the gospel, we have everything. And so even if, Diocletian is telling everybody to flay us alive, we should still have hope and joy. Even more so when we see God at work with a snapback, with a reaction. I don't think a lot of these elites especially are actually committed Christians. But Satan has let his mask off, and when that happens in human history, there's always an opportunity for a snapback, and we should not just be aware of it, but know how to capitalize on it. So that's, I got through that a lot faster than I thought. I don't know where Olson is. There he is. Okay. Sorry. So I think that's probably a good place to stop, but we've actually got a decent amount of time for questions. 20 minutes. 20 minutes, yeah. So that's the situation. I was hoping to get through it in 2 hours, but it didn't happen. I promise we'll actually get to the Bible tomorrow. But yeah, I'd really welcome conversation, reactions, questions. Or maybe not. Everyone just bought it, hook, line, and sinker. Okay.
Well,
no one has questions?
Pastor, would you respond to my question?
Actually, that's going to come up tomorrow. It is. Yeah, it's a wonderful point, but I'd like to save it. You do have somebody now.
oh, okay. Why don't you figure this out?
Go back to the Walter slide. President Hill.
He's Bush. Are you saying he's more handsome or something? Walter's more handsome?
He's married.
Now, can you hear me? Yeah, he gave me a non-working mic. Thanks.
Yes.
It's working? Okay, awesome. Awesome. Okay, yeah, I'll leave it on this one. This one's funny. Okay, there is a question somewhere. I don't know where.
I've got it. You compared to the French Revolution, had you looked at the Spanish Civil War, or maybe the way that the Russian elites now flipped Orthodox? And
Yeah.
could you compare, contrast everything about it?
Yeah, I mean, in summary, I think it's the same phenomenon. And I will bring up the Spanish Civil War later. It's interesting. I don't want to totally give it away. But Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, I'll let you guess who was on which side. But they had vastly different opinions of that conflict. And one was right and one was wrong, obviously. But I'll let you decide who was who and who was or what was right and what was wrong. So I'll save the Spanish Civil War. But yeah, I think you see the same thing after the Russian Revolution. You have a lot of the elites back then, and also now with the fall of the Soviet Union, deepen their relationship with the Orthodox Church. I think some of this is opportunistic, but I do believe some of it is actually sincere. And so again, I thought about those other examples, and I had to pick one. But I think it's the same across the board. When Satan lets his mask slip, or if he just takes it off, there is going to be a reaction in a certain part of the population saying, I don't know if I'm a Christian, I don't know if I'm ready to do the Lord's bidding, but whatever I am, I'm not that. And that's where we're at in America. There's plenty of people, common man, elites, people who haven't gone to church in 30 years, people who used to be vehement deniers of the faith, having to reevaluate because whatever I am, I'm not, and you fill in the blank. You know, I'm not that. There's one right here. And another one over here.
The snapback's going to require a real change in the fertility situation, right?
Well, it's too late. I
I
mean,
know that.
yeah,
I know that.
yeah,
But just in an attitudinal way.
yeah.
I mean, the numbers can't change.
Sure, and if I could just play off that for a second. Yeah, you can't go back and have babies you didn't have. You can't do it. And so like some of the decline is going to keep on going. Yeah, I mean the question is how hard will the snapback be? How big? How many people? And how far do you actually Christianize that snapback? Or is it just, we want to get back to the 1990s? There's lots of people who are politically conservative these days who just say, hey, I was liberal in the 1990s, and I didn't leave the Democratic Party, they left me, right? You hear people say this all the time. And you can say the same thing about lots of cultural issues. But if all they want to do is get back to the 1990s, all you're doing is pushing the cart back up the hill to let it slide.
So to take you talked about the French Revolution.
Yeah,
You had to go through the Napoleonic phase.
yeah,
It took a long time before Christianity and just basic family life made a return to France. It moved elsewhere.
yeah.
And wondering, do you think this has some other place where what we're talking about in terms of
Yeah, I mean,
recrudescence of Christian culture might actually appear?
yeah, I mean, there's huge questions about, how hard the snapback will be, how lasting it will be, all those things. I mean, look at the Spanish Civil War. Franco stops the revolutionaries, and Spain kind of gets out of step with the rest of Western Europe's moral degradation for a time. But it's more of a pause. I mean, I'm not trying to take away from a lot of the good things that he did, but it was a pause. In many ways, you see this in Eastern Europe. Behind the Iron Curtain, actually, some things stayed better than in the capitalist West. And so sometimes they'll talk about how Eastern Europe was frozen for all those decades. Again, not all good, but not all bad either. But yeah, the question is are you just pausing it? Are you actually reversing things? How much? And that's where we should see opportunity. I think that there was there's a question over here.
I just had a question about this image.
Oh yeah.
You were saying that the women always follow the men, and I hope the 2030s will happen, like you're predicting.
Oh, I'm not predicting. It's a meme. It's it's a hope.
It's such a huge shift, like in all the charts you've shown us, this divergence between the men and the women. In one way there's the divergence of the fall, but what accounts for what happened there? Why it doesn't follow the pattern you're predicting will be the ruling factor?
Yeah, so I gave a presentation a couple years ago called The Great Awakening, and if you want it, I can send it to you. And that shows kind of, white, college-educated women really did kind of take that poison apple of the Great Awakening with all of its political and religious ideologies far more than men on average. And that was a huge factor in that shift. Now I don't remember what you asked, but but I mean, like in terms of like how's it going to play out? Is that kind of?
I'm just saying, why did that happen? Like you're saying that because it's a trend, it will rectify itself. But I'm saying, why, if that's always the trend historically, why count those diversions to begin with? But
Oh,
you're
sure.
explaining it. You're
Sure.
saying there was this
Yeah, well-
weird thing.
Well, again, I'm gonna say a general statement. Some people might be offended or not, but it's only the flip side of what I said. If men are by nature leaders, more on average, right? And men typically will be more rebellious and go against the grain of things. Women are by nature more conformist. And so if the reigning ideology during the Obama years was what? High political liberalism, plus with all the explosion of the tranny stuff and BLM and all this kind of stuff, who is going to naturally conform to the dominant ideology that they eat, drink, and breathe? On average, it's going. I'm not saying that guys didn't get more liberal, but in terms of a percentage, the girls bought it more, and that's worked into the nature. Yeah. And also, speaking of higher ed, you brought up higher ed and degrees. This is another factor in this. Who is going to college more? Yeah. And so if college is the place where people are being indoctrinated into this, that's going to bear out in those populations as well. Yeah. So there's lots of factors, but that's kind of the basic understanding. And also, what is being played upon by the people promoting many of these ideologies. You should see these people as victims. You should feel sorry. You should want them to be helped by whatever degeneracy is going to help them. Women by nature, by God, have been made more sympathetic, you know? They have. Maybe not all women. Maybe if you want to point to your wife and say she's not very nice or sympathetic, you can. But women tend to be nicer, right? And the devil plays on that niceness. Guys tend to be what? More rebellious, more... I mean, we've got our faults. And the devil can play us like a fiddle too. But the devil played on women in that time period to a greater extent than men. We've got a question here. Unless you're self-identifying as a non-sympathetic woman, but maybe so, I don't know.
Well, my comment is that I think the abortion issue is the number one big thing, especially like with Kamala Harris and all the women following and stuff like that. That's just a comment.
So I'd like to address that actually, because yes, abortion drives a lot of people in terms of their political activity, but there were a lot of Christians, conservative Christians, who were very disappointed with Trump over the last few months or year about his stance on abortion, which basically was, I've already gotten it to the states and they can do what they want. And there were a lot of very sincere, committed, conservative Christians who said, well, if he isn't going to be on the gold standard, some went so far as to say, don't vote for him, even after all the things he's actually done on it. And they predicted if he doesn't take a hardline, obviously good, stance on abortion, this will really hurt him. And guess what? It didn't. Because the vast majority of pro-life Christians looked at it and said, is he holding up the gold standard theologically on this? No. But what's the alternative? Yeah, I mean, and also, we've had decades and decades of pro-life incorporated saying, we're going to do this stuff, and what did they get accomplished? Not much, you know? And that's the thing. When you're cornered and you want to fight back against horrible stuff, do you care if there's a gun or a knife or a club behind you? No, you're going to grab what you can get. And that's the natural, normal, typical reaction in the face of Satan slipping his mask and coming full throttle. You know, you take what you can get to stop it. And so all those, again, I'm not questioning their sincere pro-life beliefs, but all those people who said, oh, this is really going to hurt them, they were just dead wrong. So I agree with you. Pro-life is a huge issue. Theologically, it is, and it should be politically. I'm not taking away anything from that. But it's actually no longer a huge driving force in the same sense it was before it got struck down. Roe v. Wade got struck down. We are in a different phase now. But that gets to my point about when people are saying, hey, I'm more open to not just conservative or right-wing or whatever you want to call political ideas. I don't want to be that. But are they actually going to become Christians, you know? I'm glad that there's people who are, you know, okay with abortion under certain circumstances, that they actually also want to push back against the tranny agenda, you know? Okay, good. You're not where you should be, but I'm glad you're fighting in the trenches with us, you know? But are they going to stay there? Are we actually going to show them the true gospel and the fullness of the faith, which isn't just politics, but life and salvation? I mean, so again, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I am saying, like, everybody said this pro-life issue is going to be huge, and it wasn't. It wasn't this election. It just was not. They were wrong. And they actually discredited themselves because they were like sandbagging, you know? So, anyway. Yeah, just to explain sandbagging, did everyone understand what that meant or no? Okay, some people yes, some people no. Like if you threaten something and you don't follow through on your threat, you discredit yourself. So some of these very committed pro-life Christians said, if you aren't on the gold standard, we're not voting for you. And so they made that threat, and then it didn't matter. So they're only lessening their political voice, which is foolish.
You answered a question I've had for a while. So in Roman Catholicism, the patron saint of parish priests...
I don't know how I answered this question.
No, you did. The patron saint of parish priests is John Vianney, who's this, I think, Jesuit, he's French, like late 1700s, early 1800s. And I always wondered why that time period and why France. But during this snapback, it makes sense you would sort of pick this guy, whether truly or just symbolically, as this Catholicizing. But during that snapback, you have the aristocracy that's friendly toward the church.
Well, yeah, it becomes so.
You have like Elon Musk or whoever is friendly toward conservatism. There's no the church, right? Like we'd love it to be the LCMS.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like from a church?
Well, it's probably going to be really messy. I mean, some of these elites who are open to Christendom and maybe even the church, I don't think we're going to get all of them, you know? But, I mean, obviously we're going to turn away from these big issues to the Sons of Missouri. I've been describing all these big issues because that's the situation we find ourselves in. This is where the Sons of Missouri are at. But ultimately, yeah, I don't know Elon Musk. I'm assuming you don't either. That's not a worry, like a practical worry for you. Maybe it is for somebody, you know. But our worry is okay, this is where our sons, this is the world our sons are growing up in. Here's the dynamics at play. How are we going to keep them in the faith, get them back in the faith, and also strengthen their faith, get them married, get them having children, getting them to believe the gospel with their whole heart, soul, and mind. So, I mean, that's kind of a non-answer, but that's the practical question. That's what every father and mother, grandfather, grandmother needs to be thinking about. And that's what we're going to get into tomorrow. How do we, knowing all what I just, barfed out on you, what do we do about it? Yeah.
You kind of answered that.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah, you young people can ask questions, I mean, it is allowed, I think.
Depends which one.
It depends which one. Are there any Olsen children that have a question?
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
We'll
Well, we can give you some applause for your presentation.
Oh, thanks.